When you are looking for a word, some people, it's almost like there's so many words they don't know how to grab, and others, it's a blank screen. But still, they're having a hard time finding the word. And when you have TBI, you've got to kind of ration your cognitive energy.
There is always hope, and you are not alone.
Welcome to Hope Survives, a podcast from the Hope Survives nonprofit supporting individuals and families navigating life with brain injury. I'm your host, Cristabelle Braden. After my own experience with traumatic brain injury, including multiple re-injuries, I've learned how isolating this road can feel and how hard it can be to find a way forward. No one should have to walk it alone. On this show, we explore the realities of life with brain injury through encouragement, thoughtful conversations, expert insights, and real stories. No matter where you are on your journey, remember, you're never alone, and hope survives. Hey friends, welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. So glad that you are here listening today. Last week we talked about communication strategies and how to increase connection. And this week we are continuing the communication conversation all about aphasia. We're going to go into more detail about what aphasia is, but in a very basic sense, it's word finding. And it can often affect communication coming in on understanding as well as communication going out, which I think is the more common form of not being able to put your words together. This is very common after any type of brain injury or stroke. And today we have Tawni Ballinger, who has spent her career working with people who've had aphasia. She earned her BS degree from Baylor and her MA in speech pathology from the University of Memphis. Her early career included working in head injury units as well as acute care hospital settings. She currently serves as a clinical supervisor at the University of Memphis, specializing in aphasia therapy. With over 17 years of hospital experience, she co-founded an intensive aphasia program called the Aphasia Boot Camp with Kelly Owens in 2019. Tawni has led an aphasia support group called the Memphis Aphasia Community for the past 5 years, and she's passionate about helping people with aphasia lead fuller lives despite communication challenges. I'm excited to share with you that we actually have a workshop coming up with Tawni Ballinger talking about aphasia on May 19th at Hope Survives. You can get signed up for that at hopesurvives.org. If this podcast encourages you or if you get anything out of it, we would love to invite you to the workshop, which will include a live Q&A. So make sure to mark your calendar for May 19th and check out hopesurvives.org for more workshops and programs that we have going on. Now, before we get into the full interview, I would love to introduce Dr. Jeremy Schmoe from the Functional Neurology Center to give us a spotlight on the neurological side of aphasia.
Yeah, so when you injure the brain, you can injure multiple different areas, but a common area that gets injured is this left cortex. When you injure the left cortex, say, more so compared to the right cortex, there are language processing areas in that left brain. So you could have an aphasia, which is basically changes in to make it simple, changes in your ability to communicate effectively. If you have a Broca's aphasia, the Broca's aphasia, you're understanding everything, you're just not able to get those words out the way that you would want. So you can have a Broca's aphasia, you can also have a Wernicke's aphasia, where the information coming in isn't going in the way that it should be in terms of processing appropriately. So depending on what areas get affected, whether it's more frontal lobe, whether it's more temporal lobe, there's different types of aphasia, and it gets more in depth. So you can have expressive, you can have receptive, you can just have a global aphasia. Some people that we see say, I'm having that tip of the tongue phenomenon where I just can't get this information out. I can't get these words out, but they don't have a true receptive or expressive aphasia that you might have from a severe TBI or have from a stroke. So what can lead to these things? Traumatic brain injuries, strokes, tumors, post-surgical removal of tumors in that left brain, severe TBI where I actually injure that left cortex. We had a guy that we worked with, his name was Jordan, that came in to see us, and he drove a snowmobile, and it went up and it went through a house, then it collapsed on him, and when it came down, it severely injured his left brain. He could understand that information that's coming in, but when it came out, it was basically kind of like word salad. So it was all over the place. It doesn't mean that you don't understand things. It doesn't mean that you're not extremely smart. We're talking about just that neurocircuitry that can get effective. So many people will work with a speech language pathologist. What kind of work do we do? Well, we do neuromodulation. We might be doing low level light therapy over on that left cortex, or we might be doing activation from your cerebellum, giving feedback into that left brain. So we're trying to stimulate all the areas that fire and wire into that left brain. And that's where you still need other providers to work with people with aphasia. And that's where we coordinate care with Sister Kenny and other places locally here to make sure that people have their best chance of making the most progress that they can.
Thank you, Dr. Schmoe, for those insights. The FNC offers personalized neuro recovery programs for anyone going through brain injury and a wide range of neurological conditions. When you trust your brain to the team at the Functional Neurology Center, they take the time to get to know the whole you so they can personalize your recovery program for your unique and complex condition. There is hope for a better tomorrow, and the FNC is committed to helping you get back what matters most. Visit thefnc.com for more. Thank you to the Functional Neurology Center for your sponsorship of Hope Survives as a nonprofit and this podcast. We are so grateful. And I just love that we're able to bring more hope and awareness and encouragement and education to all of you listening to the podcast and through our programs. So with that, let's get into today's conversation on aphasia. I am here with Tawni Ballinger, who's a speech language pathologist who specializes in aphasia. Welcome to Hope Survives podcast, Tawni. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thanks, Cristabelle. Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to this.
Me too. So I met Tawni through her daughter. Her daughter, Whitney, and I are close friends, and Whitney learned about Hope Survives and everything I was doing. And she said, you have to talk to my mom. And so I'm so glad to have met you. And I did a virtual guest speaking for your support group that you do, right? The Memphis aphasia community. And that was so great. And I asked you to come here on the podcast to talk about aphasia today. So I just love what you do there.
By the way, our members loved hearing from you, by the way.
Oh,
Continue to talk about that, and your singing, that was beautiful. Thank
you. Oh, I appreciate it. It was a really special time, and it was encouraging to me. You have such a special group there, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about how you got into speech language pathology, a bit about the boot camp, and some of the other things that you do.
Okay, I'd like to. When I was in elementary school, my brother was in speech therapy, and I got to go a couple of times, and his speech therapist was actually our aunt. And so that was the first time I was ever exposed to speech therapy. And but then when I was in college, I thought I wanted to go into broadcasting, communication broadcasting. And so they had someone come to the college who was with Associated Press and talk about what that was like. And they were very aggressive and a little rough on the edges. I could tell it was a dog-eat-dog world, and I would get eaten at the first day. So then I thought, well, I'll go into nursing. And I went and shadowed my cousin and loved it. Just the energy of the hospital and all the people coming together to help others. And we went on break with her nurse friends. And this was back in the 80s, early 80s. And they all said, don't do it. We're overworked and underpaid. And back then they really were. It's much better now. So there went nursing. And then I thought, well, I'm going to go into education. And my dad said, I don't want to pay this kind of money for you to go to college for you to make that kind of money. Because back then, teachers could barely survive on what they made. And again, that's much better now, too. So there went that. So somehow I combined all those together and got communication disorders and landed back into speech pathology like my aunt. And when I went to grad school, I had an internship with a traumatic brain injury unit at the Lamar unit here in Memphis and loved it. Before that, I had worked with children and they were sweet and fun, but working with these young adults and older adults who sustained different types of head injury, it was just amazing. Some of them, it was like watching them grow in fast motion. It was an inpatient rehab, and so I would see them every day, but they were very special people. So after that, after I graduated from college, I got a job with a head injury unit, another one in Memphis. And unfortunately, that one did not make it economically and it closed. And so then I went to work for the hospitals. And I worked for Baptist Hospital for about 20 years. And so that was all types of populations, stroke, head injury, ALS, Parkinson's. And then I took off a little time, raised my kids, and now I'm back, but at the university level. And so I teach graduate students how to work with people who have aphasia. And aphasia is basically a loss of language, and it can affect your speaking, your listening, your reading, or your writing, but not your intelligence. Some people mistake that, and these people still are just as smart as they ever were, funny, they still have personalities. Different things can be affected, but they're still in there. They're like sometimes like hidden treasures, and you just have to take time to listen and get to know them to unearth the jewels that they are. So that's kind of my path.
I love that you said that. And a lot of our listeners have had brain injuries, strokes, concussions, and have had some type of loss of language. And when it comes to communication, that can be so frustrating because you're wanting to say what you want to say, but you don't know how to say it. And a lot of people can end up dismissing you in those situations. And so, what are some of the common ways that you think aphasia affects people who've had brain injuries, strokes?
Well, one of the main things is I think the isolation. They feel alone because communication is the way we connect. And they know so much more than they could say. They're in there. They're still bright. You still have thoughts and ideas and dreams and opinions. It's just, it's hard to get them out. And so, like you were saying, they feel dismissed or overlooked or misjudged. And so that can also lead to depression on top of frustration. And so, when I hear about people that are going through this and as a result, they just want to stay home, sit on the couch and watch TV all day, it breaks my heart. And so my heart is for these people to get back out in the community, be it a support group, um, a therapy program, church, family gathering, whatever, um, to fight that. I don't know. Sometimes it's a temptation to just kind of isolate, and because it can be so hard and so frustrating and embarrassing. But one thing I'm grateful for that COVID did bring us was Zoom, and so some people they may not have transportation to the support groups or to even a family gathering. But if they can touch base with people via Zoom, That's one way just to kind of stay in touch. Not only that, support groups like yours are so important and just make a difference, not only in their communication and expressively and receptively, but also in their emotional state. It's I think people underrate that sometimes, and that's kind of the hidden problem that needs to be, it's the, elephant that needs to be addressed. It's very important to maintain some social connections any way they can.
Yeah.
So,
And it's hard when you can't say what you want to say, though. And
mhm,
sometimes it's a combination when it comes to brain injury of the aphasia, but also the processing speed.
mhm,
And I remember feeling like I struggled with group conversations. So it would
yes,
be like, if I'm talking one-on-one, it was always easier for me to say what I wanted to say because the
mhm,
person would wait for you. But in a
yes,
group conversation, sometimes the subject would move on and I'm still figuring out what I wanted to say on the subject before they bounce to something
yes,
else. And then I feel left behind and
yes,
overwhelmed. And I just remember I felt a lot of times just really um sad
yeah,
in my own mind of like I'm trying to connect so hard and I just can't keep up. And so what encouragement would you have for people who maybe have struggled with the aphasia or the communication, and what are some simple things they could do to maybe strategies that they could do to help?
sure. So, the one thing that people with aphasia all have in common, aphasia can be all different types and levels, and same with the cognitive issue that you're talking about. But what the aphasia all have in common are word finding deficits. And so when you are looking for a word, some people, it's almost like there's so many words they don't know how to grab them. And others, it's a blank screen. Um, but still, they're having a hard time finding the word. When you're in a situation like that, and you're right, it's compounded with when you're in a group because you're not wanting to interrupt, you're wanting to get in, and they run on, they're on to the next paragraph. But in general, one way in you can work with the word finding is to describe it. If you can't think of the word, let's say you're trying to think of a word like mayonnaise, I don't know. And you would say, it's white and you spread it, you eat it on a sandwich, you talk around it, you get in the neighborhood of it. You could even say it's a condiment. Some people can come out with the words like that, but the simple word mayonnaise won't come out. And so you talk around when you get in the neighborhood of a word, a lot of times it will pop out. That's circumlocution within your brain. You can help pop it out. And even if it doesn't pop out, you're giving your listeners cues to what it is you're talking about. And everybody has it's called anomia. Word finding is anomia. Everybody has a touch of that. If you've had a brain injury or not, if who's that actor in that movie? He's got dark hair and he was in Top Gun. And so we all have a level of it. So it's totally acceptable to describe what you're trying to say, and people will try to jump in there and guess it for you. Um, another strategy is a pause. Sometimes people just have to take a beat and draw a breath, and that's why it's harder in a group because, and that's why it's easier one on one. Because, like you said, that person will have the courtesy to wait for you and give you a minute to think. When you're in a group, the rules of communication are a little different. The cognitive load is heavier because you're listening to voices coming from different areas. And when you have TBI, you've got to kind of ration your cognitive energy. So when speakers are coming from different areas and you have something you want to say, sometimes you have to lean in or even raise a hand almost to make your place. Like, I've got something to say. And, there's different frameworks you can work on, and we work on these in group therapy. We have, like you mentioned earlier, an intensive aphasia boot camp we do every June. And we have a large group for everyone, and then when everyone's in different small groups plus individual. It's for the whole month of June, Monday through Friday, 9 to noon. But there's different frameworks when you're working within a group because, like I said, the rules are different. And people, you can interrupt in groups, whereas we don't interrupt one on one as much, but in groups, you almost have to. And that's hard when you have aphasia. It's hard for me, and I don't have aphasia per se, you know. And Cristabelle, I can relate to I'm listening, I'm wanting to be courteous, and they've moved on to the next topic. So when something like that happens, you can say, well, circling back and just pull that group back with you. Because like I said, we all have a bit of it. And so it's totally acceptable to say, well, I want to touch on what you said before that. So pull them back. If you've got a point to make, pull them back. I mean, what you have to say is important. And you just are teaching people to listen to you. Or you're teaching people like, oh, when she does that, she's got something to say. Let's get quiet.
I love that, and advocating for yourself in those moments of saying,
Mhm,
"Hey, I have something to say," or I always tell people, if you're close enough with a friend or a trusted friend to disclose some of your brain injury symptoms, and I'll tell people, it takes me a little bit longer, and so it's gotten
mhm.
better over the years, and I've had different therapies, but I remember feeling very isolated by not being able to communicate the way I wanted to communicate. I would love to ask your advice for family members and close friends. Part of At Hope Survives, we have a group called Hope for Family, where we have a group for the family members of the person with the injury, as well as a Hope for Couples group. And in the couples group, we talk about communication every single time we meet
I
because
bet.
it's it's hard to communicate as a couple without a brain injury involved. I
Mhm,
think there's a lot of, unmet expectations we talk about, or like you don't realize it's an expectation until it's not met. And
mhm,
then you throw brain injury into the mix
mhm.
and you throw aphasia into the mix, and one person not being able to say what they want to say. So, what advice would you give to the loved ones and the family members and the partners on what are some strategies they can use to help their loved one to communicate?
Well, we have something called supported communication, and that is when you're listening to a loved one, part of it is listening and figuring out from your loved one who is struggling with aphasia, do you want me to jump in there and complete sentences? Do you want me to cue you with the first sound? Do you want me to guess or do you want me to be quiet? You know, what is most helpful? Because some people say, I just need an on ramp. If you say clap your, then I can say hands, but if you just look at me and say, what are you talking about? I'm going to need a little more help than that. Some people are very independent, and that's fine. That's the way they struggle through and find their words. There needs to be an understanding of what's fair. And like I said, even within a regular relationship, communication is tough. Throw aphasia in the mix, but sometimes people need more processing time, and you can lay out the issue on the table and say, okay, let's talk about that this afternoon. And so the person with aphasia has time to think about it, to get their thoughts together. Whereas the person who doesn't have aphasia could say, well, this is what I think you should do, or this is what I think we should do. And here's the three reasons why: one, two, three. That's not really fair or equal communication because the person with aphasia is probably going to need more processing time. Sometimes they need to cue themselves with pen and paper. What is it? How do I feel about this? What is it I'm trying to say? And depending on the level of impairment, you may need pictures to help explain what you're trying to talk about. Certainly gestures. There's just a lot of patience. And I love that the name of your groups have the word hope in it because there is hope. I mean, where there is life, where there's breath, there is hope and there are solutions. And it's not to say it's going to be easy, but there is hope. And we, coming together is how you find first each other and then hope and eventually healing on some levels.
Mm.
So anyway,
That's really good. Thank you.
mhm.
So, We've talked about some strategies for the person who has it, some strategies for the family. If someone's listening and they're like, I definitely have aphasia, how would speech language pathology help them, or what should they look for in a practitioner if they're thinking, I maybe need a little bit more help to work on this?
Okay. I feel like this has come a long way from when I first was a speech therapist, because it was like, okay, you get 8 weeks, you're done. And just in the past 15, 20 years, they have seen neuroplasticity at its finest. And I mean, God made our brains so amazing that they can recreate new pathways, not necessarily repair exactly what was damaged, but work around it, build new bridges. And so, because of that, insurance has come along, and we are able to provide speech therapy longer and for more mean. There's shown we're seeing recovery 10 years post. Now it
Mm-hmm.
slows
Yeah.
down. You know, a lot of people are treating it almost like a gym membership of, I want to stay healthy. I don't want to lose what I've gained, and I can always make incremental progress. And when you're looking, if you are interested in looking for something like that, you want to go somewhere where they're using evidence-based therapy. And so these are therapies that have just had thousands and thousands of hours and people that they've tested that they are effective and efficient. But on top of that, that they are targeting things that are important to you and your life participation. And so it's not just a matter of you coming in a room, sitting across from a table, and seeing how many zoo animals you can name in a minute. No, it's like, what is driving you crazy about your aphasia at home? Let's tackle that. Oh, you and your wife are getting in fights about the grocery list. Let's talk about how you can think through and express what it is you want from the grocery store. It's called life participation. If you can find a speech therapist who uses the life, it's LPAA, life participation approach for aphasia, that's going to be your best bet, because what you will work on will be meaningful to you. If it's not meaningful to you, you're not going to want to work on it. You're not going to be motivated to work on it. So you want stuff that you can take home and work on tomorrow. If it's, I want to be able to read a book to my grandchild. Well, that's what you work on. Or I want to be able to speak at my granddaughter's wedding. That's what you work on. I mean, you work on real life functional tasks that will make a difference in your day to day life. So,
That's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And I love that that exists and letting people know about that. And so thank you for all the work you do for aphasia and in educating people to even have more help and more educated practitioners for aphasia. That's really wonderful. So we are running close on our time here, but I would love to ask you, I always ask our guests at the end of each podcast, what are your final words of hope for our listeners?
I would say the fact that there is hope, that this isn't as good as it gets. And it's going to take pushing and getting you out of your comfort zone. And a lot of times we hear, oh, this happened to me. But if you can look at it, this happened for me. What can I do with this? Where I am right now, looking forward, there is hope. What are my next steps? And that might be making a new friend. That might be planning. One thing we do with our support group is we go out to eat once a month at a different restaurant, and there's no therapy involved. It's just socialization, being around other people who struggle with aphasia. Um, but just thinking, what's one way I can push myself to be more active in my own life, to get my life bigger than my aphasia? I would say there's hope. Don't give up. Just keep looking, keep pushing. There is hope.
I love that. And I love that you do that restaurant thing. We talk about the frustration of restaurants as well as the background noise and the overwhelm and decision making on a menu. So there's a lot of cognitive
Therapy is
therapies
built in.
happening.
That's true. I mean, we have like 15 to 20 people that come every month, and just
So
different restaurants
fun.
downtown. So
That's wonderful. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and for sharing your expertise.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. So
Thank
I love
you.
the work you're doing, Cristabelle. It's so needed, so important.
Thank you.
As a reminder, we have a workshop coming up with Tawni Ballinger. If you have more questions about aphasia, you can join the workshop and the live Q&A to get some resources, help, and encouragement coming up on May 19th. As always, you can check out our website, hopesurvives.org, to register, as well as check out all the rest of the programs, webinars, and workshops that we have available.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, we would love if you would consider leaving us a rating or a review. We are so grateful to be able to provide this support for the brain injury community. And if you would like to get connected, please visit hopesurvives.org.